Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
The children are invited to story time in the Fellowship Center. When Abraham was 99 years old, God told him that he and his wife Sarah would become parents. 99 years old. How many people do you know live long enough to be that age? In 2012, the average life expectancy worldwide is only 71 years old, 68.5 for males and 73.5 for females. My grandmother lived to be 101 years old. By that time, she had raised 2 children and cared for 10 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. But going back to Abraham and Sarah, it had been 24 years since the first time God made a covenant with Abraham, promising that he and his wife would be, as one pastor puts it, the source of life for a family tree that would clog up the server of Ancestry.com. They were to be ancestors of a multitude of nations, and that this child would be a sign of an everlasting covenant. Since then, against all odds, they'd left the security of their retirement home, changed their names, traveled and laughed a lot, had all kinds of spiritual adventures, and relocated to the land God promised them. Paul had a name for this absurd willingness to be part of God's plan at a time when Abraham's body was so old it was as good as dead, and Sarah's womb was barren. Paul called it faith. Faith is a concept that's difficult to understand and even more difficult to explain. It needs to be experienced in order to make sense. Here is one preacher's attempt to describe faith. He said, "It's like being in a tall building and hearing the fire sirens and realizing that your only way out is to jump into the net that the firefighters are holding for you on the ground below." Faith is not just knowing that the net is there or that it is strong enough to hold you when you fall, nor is it about knowing that those holding it will be able to hold it as you land. Faith is not knowledge. It is acting on that knowledge believing all these things were true enough for you to actually make the jump. There are times when life circumstances can push our faith to the edge. And whether we articulate the questions or not, we may be wondering, can we really trust God? Or has he forgotten me? When a loved one dies, when you or someone you care about is suffering from a terminal disease, when you lose a job or go through a divorce or have a sudden reversal of good fortune, the faithfulness of God may be called to question because an anticipated blessing or harbored hope has not been fulfilled. And this is a time when it's helpful to talk to someone you can trust, just to articulate the questions and give voice to your doubts and fears, and allow yourself to vent and grieve. We're afraid of being abandoned by God. The reality of that sense of abandonment is so poignantly expressed in the words of Jesus from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And that's what makes Paul's words from Romans so powerful. The good news is that God does not abandon anyone. And nothing ultimately separates God's people from God's love. God's promise and faithfulness is never broken. The only thing is that his timeline, as Abraham and Sarah found out, may be a lot different from ours. I can't help but marvel at what it took Abraham and Sarah to take that big leap of faith, to uproot themselves and leave everything familiar behind for a promise that seemed impossible to fulfill. That's one perspective. But from the perspective of denying oneself, to use Jesus' language, what they did, perhaps, was to deny themselves a life of independence, security, safety, with just the two of them, for a life that propels them into a trusting relationship with God. And every step that they took in faith nurtured and strengthened the faith that they had. And their lives were transformed. So that leads us to Jesus' invitation to deny yourself and take up your cross. When we hear those words, we tend to think in terms of death and suffering and giving up things. But there may be another way to look at this. If we move beyond that, we see a gracious God choosing to be in relationship with us because he loves us. So the cross represents God's commitment to humanity. The cross also represents what we do when we're not in relationship with the other and when we think only of ourselves. To be true to who we are to be connected with God and to each other. When we refuse to be in relationship with others as a community, we deny the expression of our true selves. One of the moving stories that I heard when I attended the Asian Lutheran conference in Malaysia was from a woman named Angela. Angela worked for the South Andhra Lutheran Church in India, and she's in charge of 70 to 75 Bible women. This is intriguing because there are no Bible men, just Bible women. Bible women are trained evangelists who go to different towns to spread the gospel of Jesus. These women face a big challenge in ministry because of the caste system in India. All these Bible women belong to the lower caste, and that's because the women from the higher castes are Muslim, and they're restricted in who they associate with. So essentially, the Bible women are ministering to the people of the lower caste or the outcasts in society. The story is that there's one particular Bible woman who went around a neighborhood to evangelize. She knocked on the door of an older man. This man was Hindu and told her to go away. He was not interested in whatever she had to say. She was very gracious and continued to go around the neighborhood to talk to those who would listen. Then one day, this man got really ill and he had to be taken to the hospital. Guess what? He asked for the Bible woman. At first, no one made an attempt to find her, but he insisted and didn't stop until they found her. And so this Bible woman came. She shared her faith. She told him about this newfound, joyful, rich life that she is experiencing through Jesus Christ. The man listened intently, and he became Christian.